Welcome to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies.
Shared light forms, an analysis of cases. Mark Fox. A paper delivered on the 7th of September 2003 at the 6th Ecumenical Conference on Christian Parapsychology in Lincoln. It is an abbreviation, with a revised concluding section, of Sharing the Light, Occasional Paper 39 in the series of occasional papers of the Religious Experience Research Centre at the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, University of Wales, Lampeter. Dr. Fox is the author of Religion, Spirituality, and the Near-Death Experience. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of the time in which it was written. Responsibility for opinions expressed herein rests solely with the author, and such opinions must not be taken to represent those of the CFPSS. Sharing the light. The so-called problem of verification is well known within the philosophy of religion whenever claims to religious experience are considered. Such unusual experiences, it is argued, differ from ordinary experiences in that they are usually private, solitary episodes. The Virgin Mary, for example, appears to prefer to appear to only one witness and in generally solitary locations. Given this recognition of the solitariness of religious experience, it is frequently asserted that such episodes are susceptible to this-worldly, naturalistic interpretations rather than otherworldly, supernaturalistic ones. Such as, for example, that the subject was hallucinating and in some way, rarely specified, projecting the vision outwards from mental space. By this reckoning, the evidential force of religious experience as proof of supernatural, transcendent realities is weakened by the fact that one person's subjective impression of an apparently external presence or entity cannot be checked against the simultaneous experiences of others at the same location and in the same circumstances. However, there is still a large enough corpus of testimony to shared experiences within such contexts which allows investigators considerable scope for inquiry. Whilst, for example, collective religious visions are much rarer than private, solitary visions, they are by no means unreported. On the contrary, on repeated occasions numerous witnesses have experienced Marian apparitions, together with attendant phenomena which frequently include unusual displays of light. At Medjugorje in the former Yugoslavia, for example, the Blessed Virgin Mary on occasion appeared to up to 6 young visionaries simultaneously, and sometimes many more persons were witnesses to the extraordinary phenomena that accompanied her appearances, as the following testimony dramatically shows. About 50 neighbors went along and we all began praying. All at once 7 or 8 of us began shouting, "Look at that light." It came from the sky, as if the sky had opened up about 10 meters, and it came towards us. It stopped over the hole in the ground. He pointed to where the people had been digging up the earth. There was a wooden cross in the hole and the light seemed to stream from it. It was as if a balloon of light had burst and there were thousands of tiny stars everywhere. We were just bathed in light. We were all crying. As long as I live, I shall never forget that night. The association of unusual light phenomena with apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary and sometimes witnessed by large numbers of people is not confined to Medjugorje. The widely reported Dance of the Sun, occurring at Fatima in 1917, was witnessed by approximately 150 people, of which one, a taxi driver, reported. I was with a large group of people outside the church, and suddenly I noticed the sun doing strange things. It began to swing to and fro. Finally a ray of light separated itself from the sun and traveled like the rays of a rainbow towards the place where the Virgin had first appeared. It then rested on the church tower, on which a clear image of the Virgin appeared. Given the opportunities for corroboration of detail that such experiences offer, it is not surprising that researchers in recent years have spent considerable amounts of time looking for shared accounts across a range of religious and paranormal experiences that can be checked and, if possible, verified. The field of near-death studies, for example, has very recently acknowledged and presented evidence of the existence of shared near-death experiences, known variously as empathic NDEs, death coincidence, conjoint near-death experiences, and mutual NDEs. No less an authority than Raymond Moody, for example, who almost single-handedly ushered in the modern interest in NDEs with his best-selling 1975 study Life After Life, has in very recent years presented a small number of such cases, including that of Joan. While sleeping beside her terminally ill husband, Joan dreamed that they were strolling down a pathway, through a meadow, and into a dark tunnel. Inside, a soft yet brilliant light surrounded them and illuminated their way. She was feeling love and peace as never before when her husband said, "Joni, you must go back now." At first she ignored him and continued to stroll, but when he tugged at her elbow, she spun around. To her amazement, he appeared healthy, athletic, and without glasses, much as he had in his youth. "You must go back," he repeated. "It isn't your time. I'll be back for you when it is." Joan sensed that they were at a point of no return and turned to leave, but just then a noise outside their window startled her awake. Opening her eyes, she saw that her dear husband had continued his journey into death. The recent spate of interest in shared experiences of an unusual nature is by no means confined to the field of NDE research. As might be anticipated, the huge popular interest in angels and angelology in recent years has thrown up a significant number of conjoint angelic encounters. Emma Heathcote James, for example, in a recent popular study of angel visitations drawing on more than 800 case studies for its analysis, includes several, of which the following is representative. My grandmother and her younger sister were in Eastbourne to visit my great-grandmother who was very ill and not expected to live very long. Walking away from the house one afternoon, and having found her very much at peace, though quite obviously very poorly, they were discussing the situation and, no doubt, preparing for the inevitable, when they both stopped in their tracks and caught hold of one another, saying, "Did you see that?" They both, independently, claimed to have seen two shining winged people, who they were convinced must have been angels, gently escorting a human away. It was over in a second, but my grandma and auntie never forgot this experience, as they heard on their way home that their mum had died, at the precise moment they saw the angels. There are, to be sure, elements of the above account that compare with other, similar, perhaps stylized accounts reported globally and cross-culturally. In particular, the theme of perceiving some sort of apparition, recognizably human or angelic, at the point of another's death, bears close comparison with crisis apparition experiences reported virtually universally, and already the subject of detailed academic investigation by the Society for Psychical Research and other, similar, bodies. The Common Core Study. All of the above examples, diverse though they may appear, are connected by the fact that what is reported in each case is some sort of light form that appears to defy conventional, rational explanation. It was clear that the occurrence of a significant number of such shared accounts in the archives of the Religious Experience Research Centre, the RERC, at the University of Wales, Lampeter would be potentially revealing in itself. It would also be interesting to see if such shared experiences contributed significantly to the quest to find a common core. In addition, it might be possible, if such accounts did turn out to exist, to determine what percentage of the total number of accounts containing light forms were shared. Other possibilities, however, quickly presented themselves. What contexts, for example, did such shared encounters occur in? Were these significantly different from single-person encounters? Or were they consistent with the other categories of experience the archive contained? Then there was the question of the effects of the experiences on their subjects. What were the overall emotional responses of witnesses to the events they experienced? Did the experiences lead to positive, or conversely, negative, fruits? Were there any accounts in which multiple witnesses had reported the same events, thoughts, feelings, and fruits, perhaps independently of each other? And finally, what of the categories of shared experiences themselves? Did the archive contain any accounts comparable to those reported in the existing literature? Were there, for example, any shared Marian apparitions, shared UFO sightings, or shared angelic encounters? Perhaps more interestingly still, Did the archive contain any significant categories of shared experience totally unlike anything in the literature? Would it yield new categories of shared experiences of light forms that might push our appreciation and understanding of the phenomenon in new, and perhaps unexpected, directions? Overall, and given the potential for understanding light forms offered by shared accounts, it was hoped that their unusual nature and broad contemporary appeal might yield some of the project's most useful and significant conclusions. Analysis. At first sight, the number of cases of shared experiences within this category appeared disappointingly low, only 10 accounts out of a total of 387 examined, not all of which I have the time to recount in detail today. However, the content of these cases was such that the particular time and attention devoted to them was richly repaid. Of the 10 cases, one featured a Marian apparition experienced by 2 soldiers on patrol in the Falls Road area of Belfast, Northern Ireland, in October 1969. As the respondent tells the story, "Until October 1969 I could take or leave religion. I believed there was some sort of a God, and that was that. I had an inborn hatred of the Pope and everything he stood for. Then, while I was serving with the Queen's Regiment in Belfast, a strange thing happened to me. One cold, damp night I was patrolling the grounds of a Catholic school just off the Falls Road, and cursing the people who lived in that area under my breath as I went on my way. About an hour passed and I had a feeling that I was not alone. I must say, I was surprised that the feeling did not frighten me, as it was about 2:45 in the morning and quite dark. Suddenly I felt quite warm and at peace not only with myself, but with everyone. From across the road the black shape of a Catholic church seemed to draw my attention. When I finally turned, I saw in the sky a white light. As I looked, the light gradually took the shape of the Virgin Mary. My friend came into the courtyard at this moment and he saw exactly the same as I did. She was standing, her arms outstretched towards us. It nearly made my friend die of fright, but it had the opposite effect on me. Although Our Lady didn't speak, all those misgivings I once had melted away. Soon after this, I converted to the Catholic faith, and have never looked back. I know that God, in His personal love for me, sent this manifestation of Our Blessed Lady to save me from hell, RERC case number 3008. A number of features deserve particular comment here. The apparition has a dramatically contrasting effect on both experience, seemingly creating warmth and peace in the narrator, whilst frightening his friend, a fellow soldier on patrol, perhaps. The fruits of the experience are particularly striking also, leading to the conversion of the writer to Catholicism and an apparently dramatic change of heart toward those he once despised. Indeed, this feature is particularly noteworthy for another reason. It is often commented on in the relevant literature that visions correspond to prior expectation, leading to the conclusion that, somehow, experience cultural and linguistic repertoires of beliefs, concepts, and values somehow cause the experiences they then have, shaping and essentially creating them to conform to expectations. Yet a moment's reflection on the above account shows how problematical such a position is. For what are we to make of that mass of experiences in which experience see what they do not expect to see or, as in the above account, undergo experiences that they were previously resistant and even hostile to? If expectation does indeed create experience, what of situations in which experience positively confounds expectation? Of course, skeptics may reply that, despite the deliberate disavowals, experience such as the Falls Road soldier are seeing what they expected to see really, perhaps even unconsciously. Whilst recognizing the validity of this position, it should be borne in mind that it weakens considerably the force of the argument, for it means in practice that there is nothing to stop us modifying and molding any set of expectations in any way whatsoever we like in order to conform them to any eventual experience that we are trying to explain. Shadows without lights. Also unparalleled elsewhere was another interesting shared account located in the archive in which the subject and his companion found themselves casting shadows on the ground as if a strong light was present and shining on them from behind, but where, in fact, no light could be discerned. The respondent, writing in 1971, refers to an event that took place some 12 years previously when, a friend and myself spent a few days at Easter at a remote Lakeland inn. I was about 54, and he about 52. The subject adds that his wife, at the time of the experience, was ill and in a London nursing home. On Easter Sunday, the landlord of the inn invited the two friends to the morning church service, and afterwards they began to discuss the service and its religious aspect before drawing very different conclusions. Clearly, whilst the friend was inclined towards a scientific reading of the Bible, the subject was a believer in the C of E. Later, deciding on a walk before bedtime, the two friends set off. It was a beautiful night, with no moon and only the stars and the outline of the mountains to be seen, and not a sound to be heard. After a quarter of a mile along the lonely lane, our two shadows appeared in front of us, and continuing for a further 10 minutes got brighter and sharper as if a bright light was behind us, but there was no light and no moon, and eventually the vision faded. I don't mind saying that I was troubled and possibly frightened, as if I was in the presence of something beyond understanding, and even my learned friend was shaken. Reflecting on the meaning of the experience in his 1971 letter, the writer adds that, "I think at the time, I thought of the Bible story of the burning bush, and was it Moses? Was also frightened." He recalls that, after the return from the trip, I told my wife the story, and quite simply she said, "It was only God reminding you that He is there." He adds, shortly after, she died. RERC case number 2519. This strange account of an invisible light casting strong shadows, which is interpreted in religious ways by the subject and his wife, is also rather unusual in that it troubles and frightens the respondent and even shakes the learned friend. Unlike the Falls Road Marian apparition, and, as we shall see, unlike most of the remainder of the shared light encounters that we will consider, the experience appears to result in fear and distress rather than peace and comfort. The implication at the end of the account is that the light may have been conforming to the writer's wife's interpretation of it, coming to remind the subject of God's presence, in anticipation of his wife's passing and his own, subsequent, widowhood. We do not know, because he does not tell us, whether the experience was of any genuine comfort to the writer in the years following the episode. As we will now see, however, the appearance of calming, peaceful, loving light in the midst of illness, grief, anxiety, and distress appears to be a consistent feature of a number of shared experiences of it, bringing us close to a fundamental feature of light forms that may point toward their possessing some kind of a common core, identity, or source. Crisis lights. 5 accounts of shared experiences of light, 50% of the total number, appeared at times of clear crisis and usually in association with a serious, life-threatening illness. In some instances, the light appeared to actually presage a death. Consider this one, for example, written in August 1971, about an experience that occurred many years previously. It was during the 1914-18 war. I was 15 years old and my sister, aged 17 years, had died with TB. Just 2 or 3 days before this happened, she was in the same room as me and my mother. I was sleeping with my dear mother and I saw a most beautiful light coming from the corner of the ceiling, just like we see when our dear Lord's in pictures. I said, "Mum." And she answered me by saying, "Did you see it?" So we both witnessed it. In those days we had no electric lighting. The street lamp was gas mantles what had to be lighted by men, and also no cars, but it was most beautiful and I will never forget it. RERC case number 2866. The writer of this account is clearly not an educated lady, but the attempts made, and discarded, to find alternative conventional explanations of an apparently heavenly light show that the writer had clearly considered these. No electric lights, no cars, and apparently no explanation to be had from the existence of gas street lighting will do to explain the light seen. Another comparable account, equally impressive in detail, can be added to those already examined. It was sent to the Centre in August 1971 and concerns an experience that took place in 1932. In the account, the writer's premature, frail baby son, and her mother went together to a bedroom they were to share after mother and baby had arrived in Penarth, the mother's hometown, where the experience took place. As the writer states, "We put the baby in a bassinet in the corner, on my side of the double bed. There was one tall window only, well away from the cot, which was in a corner, and it was a back bedroom, house built in 1910. About 2 a.m., it was a still night. I awoke suddenly and was conscious at once of a blue light in the room. I turned my head and saw suspended over the baby's cot a large blue star which remained there, distinct in outline, for quite 5 minutes and then faded away. In some astonishment, but I recollect, no fright, I lay in silence for about an hour. Suddenly, the light appeared again, and once more, the star. This time, a soft voice said quietly, "Dolly." It was my mother. I replied yes. "Do you see what I am seeing?" The answer was yes, and she further astonished me by remarking that she had been aware of it an hour previously but had been afraid to see if I was awake, or had noticed it, in case she was suffering perhaps from delusions. To this day, I do not know why either of us saw this phenomenon. The star was right over the cot, RERC case number 2287. As with other accounts, it is clear that the light appears in a context of anxiety, for we may reasonably assume that the frail, premature son was giving some cause for concern. There is a difference, however, concerning the events that were to follow the episode in that the son survived, going on, as the writer states, to gain a degree at Cardiff University and himself to father a child. The normality of his life, however, only appears to have reinforced her view that the light was inexplicable, for she ends her account by remarking that this experience is in no way explainable, as my son has done, so far, nothing remarkable to help mankind or distinguished himself in any way. Another apparent difference between this and other accounts is that the light appears to have had no calming influence on either the writer or her mother. The only emotions recounted are astonishment and a lack of fear. It is also interesting to note that the light appeared not once but twice and was seen by both witnesses on both occasions. As with the previous two accounts, however, the writer entertains and discards conventional explanations for the light. As she states, there was only one window in the room, it was well away from the cot, and the bedroom was at the back of the house where presumably no outside streetlights were shining. The color of the light also deserves brief comment here. As is clear, on both occasions it is described as blue. Whilst we have not so far seen any other descriptions of the light as having this color within the category of shared experience, analysis of the other categories of light experiences in the archive makes clear that blue lights are rather consistently encountered. What has been emerging with particular force over the course of this analysis is the existence of a particular category of light form that we might call a crisis light. As has already been suggested, the occurrence of unusual lights, defying conventional explanations, and manifesting at times of extreme crisis might even be said to hint at a common core or function that such lights possess. We need to test whether, for example, single witness encounters with unusual lights occur to any statistically significant degree within contexts marked by anxiety, fear, danger, or distress. If they do, this common core function hypothesis will have been considerably reinforced. What has been additionally interesting and emergent so far has been the fact that so many encounters with unusual lights, whether in contexts of crisis or elsewhere, are, in fact, shared. Indeed, shared deathbed visions are rare in the literature. Osis and Haraldson mention only 2 or 3, Barrett none at all, and neither source includes shared visions of light. To this extent, the Common Core study has already drawn attention to a highly interesting category of shared religious experience that has been hitherto underreported in the literature. It is to be hoped that more accounts may now be forthcoming, not least because of the possibilities of corroboration that such experiences afford. Conclusions. This analysis of shared experiences of light is, in fact, one small part of a much greater study that I have been undertaking at the University of Wales, Lampeter. The RERC currently located there contains an archive of almost 6,000 accounts of unusual religious and spiritual experiences, and almost 400 of these describe unusual encounters with light. These include encounters with lights having a particular location in a room, as with some of the above accounts, encounters with lights during near-death experiences, and descriptions of experiences in which subjects were filled or wrapped in light or found themselves suddenly illuminated by beams, rays, or luminous shafts. My findings as the study approaches completion are various, and I will conclude this paper by describing some of them. Just over 50% of the total number of experiences of light took place at times of crisis, usually deep crises such as bereavement resulting in total despair. Overwhelmingly, the experiences were accompanied by extremely positive feelings. Peace, comfort, joy, and love were typically reported throughout. In fact, the appearance of unusual lights at such times was frequently transformative, ending the subject's prior despair and setting him or her on a new path. Positive long-term fruits frequently ensued, including a newfound or renewed interest in spiritual matters and a decreased fear of death. What might serve to explain such uniformity of experience? It could hardly be the case that the respondents knew each other and were copying each other's accounts, because they were submitted over an approximately 30-year period from persons of all ages and walks of life. Hallucination also seems unlikely, for how could so many people independently hallucinate the same thing? Explanations of the light in terms of disturbances in the visual cortex, sometimes invoked to explain the being of light often seen during near-death experiences, are ruled out on the grounds that the vast majority of subjects were nowhere near death at the time of their experiences. Similarly, once popular theories that sudden illuminations may be the sudden breaking through into consciousness of hitherto repressed and incubating unconscious contents singularly fail to explain why they so often take the form of an actual, apparently physical and sometimes external, light. Perhaps, then, we are thrown back on a completely different explanation, that such lights are the breaking through into our own physical world of some kind or kinds of spiritual presences. The fact that they arrive when they are most needed indicates that these presences may be intelligent, concerned, and benign. Subjects rarely call them angels, reflecting, perhaps, the fact that the current popular interest in angels did not exist when many of the accounts were submitted to the RERC. But perhaps angels and near-death experiences, themselves occurring at times of extreme crisis, are but smaller subcategories of a more overarching set of encounters with transformative lights. I call them light forms, partly because, as I have shown, the lights take various forms, and partly because they resemble life forms in possessing presence and personality. I would be particularly interested if listeners would like to share with me their own experiences of such unusual and uplifting lights. Do tell your experiences in the comments, or email us at admin@churchesfellowship.co.uk.